Carroll Edward Eddie Cole was born in Sioux City, Iowa on May 9th, 1938. His father was Laverne Cole and his mother was Vesta. But around 1939, the family moved to California. Carroll didn't start his life as a serial killer. Or did he? Or was he created? The old nurture versus nature quandary. One thing is certain, he ended his life as a serial killer. Hello and welcome to Storytime with One Big Hoax. I'm your host, Trina Hoax. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the ascendancy of the killings of Carroll Eddie Cole that led him to being perhaps one of the most prolific serial killers of modern times, having killed at least 5 people, but having claimed the number to be anywhere between 14 and 35. Eddie was reportedly abused as a child, physically, mentally, and sexually. Who knows if things would have been different if his father had been around more often when Eddie was younger. When the family first moved to California, Laverne worked in a shipyard. However, it wasn't long after that he went off to fight in World War II. In 1943, while Laverne was away, it's reported that Vesta had several affairs. When she went on her rendezvous, she supposedly took Eddie along. She was said to be drunk during her escapades. After they would return home, she would beat him and twist his arm and threaten to beat him if he told. What was worse for Eddie in some ways was that Vesta reportedly dressed Eddie as a girl, and she even sent him to school this way. This, coupled with his unisex name, resulted in him being teased and called girly by his classmates. Please understand that back then, the lines were more clearly drawn between boys and girls with respect to how they dressed and what was deemed appropriate. In 1945, the beatings had ended when Laverne returned from the war. This was prior to Eddie going to first grade, but the damage had already been done. It is clear from what Eddie said in his later autobiography that he wrote while he was in prison that his very first murder, which was deemed an accident by school officials, was in fact done intentionally. He was just 8 years old at the time, and he had drowned an 8-year-old classmate named Dwayne in a lake in Richmond, California. Supposedly, Dwayne was one of the boys who had mercilessly teased Eddie. During a press interview years after the event had taken place, Eddie said that he was primed. He said that he had made the mental commitment that he was going to get even with his mother. From there, he said, things just built up and became an obsession. Sadly, Eddie was deemed a genius with an IQ of 152. However, his grades were bad. While Eddie was a teenager, he committed many crimes. None of them were too serious, petty crimes, like minor thefts, and there was an arrest for drunkenness. But still, a waste of his genius. After dropping out of high school after the 10th grade, he joined the U.S. Army. However, his career was short-lived. He was put in the brig at one point for bad conduct for stealing pistols. Then in 1958, when he was 20, he was arrested on suspicion of burglary and auto theft, which got him discharged from the service. He returned to live with his parents at this time and reportedly was abused by his mother further as she continued to rub his nose in all of his failures. He continued to live with his parents for the next 2 years. He had odd jobs during that time and dabbled in petty crime. His next known foray into major crime was in 1960 when he attacked 2 couples who were parked on Lover's Lane. He reportedly attacked them with a hammer. He was convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and sentenced to 30 days on the county work farm. Soon after this happened, he flagged down a police car and stated that he was having violent fantasies of raping women and strangling them. Eddie was in a variety of mental hospitals over the next 3 years. At the last one, a doctor named Dr. Weiss wrote that Eddie seemed to be afraid of the female figure and could not have sex with her before killing her. I am no psychologist, but this seems to fit with how his mother treated him during her sexual rendezvous. Unfortunately, this Dr. Weiss approved Eddie's release from Stockton State Hospital, even knowing this and having diagnosed him with a schizophrenic reaction of the undifferentiated type. When Eddie was released, his mother bought him a bus ticket so he could move to Dallas, Texas, where his brother Richard was living. While living there, he met and married a reported alcoholic stripper named Billy Whitworth. However, marriage did not change his perspective towards women in general. The marriage only lasted for 2 years because after convincing himself that his wife was sleeping around, he burned down a nearby hotel where he thought she was having affairs. Not surprisingly, he was arrested for arson and sent to prison for 2 years. After he was released from prison, he entered the bedroom of an 11-year-old girl in Missouri and tried to strangle her in her sleep. He was arrested for this and served 5 years. After that sentence was served, he wound up in Nevada, where he attempted to strangle 2 women. After this, he again checked himself into a mental institution. It was clear he was afraid of what he was becoming and wanted help. However, the system failed Eddie once again. Dr. Felix Peebles diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, alcoholism, and noted that he had murderous fantasies, yet sent him on his way with a ticket to San Diego. It's important to note that Dr. Peebles recanted his diagnosis and said that Eddie was a manipulative man who was making stuff up and threatening violence as a way of getting shelter when he was out of money. As an aside, antisocial personality disorder is defined as a chronic pattern of behavior that disregards the rights and well being of others. People with ASPD often exhibit behaviors that conflict with social norms, leading to issues with interpersonal relationships, employment, and legal matters. It usually manifests in childhood or early adolescence. So, what had happened if any of the mental institutions had kept him? Unfortunately, we'll never know, nor will the victims who fell prey to Eddie. Eddie's next victim was Essie Louise Buck. They met in a bar in San Diego where he picked her up on May 7, 1971. This was just 2 days before Eddie's 33rd birthday. Once he had her in his car, he strangled her to death. He put her body in the trunk and drove around with her there before finally dumping her on his birthday. 2 weeks later, he killed another woman who is unidentified. He buried her in a wooded area. Later, Eddie said that he killed them because they were cheating on their husbands and that they reminded him of his mother. In June of 1971, Eddie was sentenced to time for theft and drunk driving. He was released from prison in March of 1972. In July of 1973, Eddie married his second wife, Diana Faye Youngblood Pashal, who was reportedly an alcoholic like his first wife. She was a bartender. They did not get along. They argued and fought frequently, leading to Eddie disappearing for days at a time. It was then that his killings escalated. He would kill women while he was away, reportedly cannibalized one of them to a certain extent. At some point, Eddie left Diana in Vegas and fled to Wyoming after stealing a shipment of coins from where he was working. Although things are murky with his timeline and his killings, Eddie reportedly met a woman named Marlene T.P. Hamer in August of 1975, who he strangled to death and left in a sleeping bag on a hillside after she suggested that they have sex. He fled the state the day after her body was found. Following this, Eddie engaged in mail fraud and other crimes that landed him in prison. He was sentenced to a year in February of 1977. On May 14, 1977, police recovered the body of Kathleen Bloom, who was 26, a prostitute who Eddie had strangled and dumped in a stranger's backyard. In July of 1977, Eddie was jailed for car theft in Vegas. He made bail and headed for Oklahoma City. On the night before Thanksgiving of 1977, Eddie met a woman at a topless bar, and they decided to spend the night together. He claimed that he awoke to find her dead in his bathtub with remnants of her feet and arms in his refrigerator, and her buttocks were found in a skillet on the stove. He collected her body parts and dumped her at the city dump. Eddie, on March 8th of 1978, was eventually sentenced to 6 months in jail and 3 years of probation. He served 3 months before being released, after which he reunited with Diana. On October 25th of that same year, Eddie was arrested for being drunk and was charged with a probation violation. He was released on a $2,000 bond. He was arrested for unknown charges in the following month, though it was never reported to his probation officer. In August of 1979, Eddie met Bonnie Sue O'Neill, who was 39 years old. They had a night of sex, and he strangled her when she mentioned that she had to call her husband. He left her body in a garbage can in the back of the building. Unlike his first wife, who got away through divorce, Diana was not so lucky. On September 19th of 1979, Eddie strangled her to death. A neighbor had called the police 8 days later when she saw him digging in his crawl space. However, oddly, police thought Diana had died due to heavy drinking. alcohol poisoning, even though they found her stuffed in a closet wrapped in a blanket. Eddie was released after being questioned. After this incident, Eddie moved around. He ended up in Las Vegas where he met 50-year-old Marie Cushman at a bar. The two decided to go to a hotel where they had sex, presumably, before he strangled her to death. He left her body in the room for a maid to find. At some point, Eddie returned to Vegas and started working for a religious charity as a truck driver. Perhaps before he killed Marie, it is unclear. At any rate, in December of 1979, he ended up marrying a coworker. While they were on their honeymoon, they were pulled over. He did not have a valid driver's license, so his name was run. What police found was a warrant for parole violations. He wound up in the medical center for federal prisoners. He was released in October of 1980 and bused to Dallas. After he arrived in 1980, he killed 3 more women by strangulation. He was a suspect in the second murder and was found at the scene of the third. He was arrested. He was held in custody long enough for police to determine that the cause of death of this woman was natural causes. In the meantime, police were about to remove Eddie from their suspect list for the second killing, but before they could, he confessed to all 3 killings. The women he killed were Sally Thompson, Dorothy King, and Wanda Roberts. In addition, he told police that he had killed at least 14 other women that he could actually recall over the past 9 years. However, he also stated that he may have killed many more, but he couldn't remember because he was typically drunk when he committed the crimes. Cole was convicted of the 3 Texas murders on April 9, 1981. He was sentenced to life in prison at Huntsville Prison in Texas. In January of 1984, Eddie was informed of the death of his mother. After she died, Cole reportedly had a change of attitude. He confessed to murders in Nevada and agreed to be tried for them, even though he knew his sentencing could mean death. In February of 1984, Eddie was extradited to Nevada. He was convicted in the strangulation deaths of 2 women, Kathleen Bloom and Marie Cushman, one in 1977 and one in 1979. In October, Eddie was sentenced to death. He reportedly thanked the judge after receiving the sentence. On the day of his death, many organizations and individuals petitioned for the commutation of Eddie's sentence. However, he vehemently protested against this. Cole was executed by lethal injection on December 6, 1985, at Nevada State Prison. He was pronounced dead at 2:10 a.m. His brain was removed and sent to the University of Nevada, Reno Medical School to be studied. Questions remain about Eddie's story. First, we have the nurture versus nature question. And if nurture, what might he have done with his genius in a better life? We're also left wondering how different his life might have turned out if he had received the proper mental health that he needed and apparently so desperately sought. And of course, we cannot forget the lives of the victims. What might their lives have been had they not been cut short by Eddie? And how were the loved ones of Eddie's victims affected? Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Storytime with One Big Hoax. Until next time, here's wishing you infinite hugs and kisses. Bye bye.